The year is 1794. The revolution in France has devoured its own. The guillotine's blade, slick with the blood of king and commoner, cannot feed a starving nation. In Paris, the reign of terror is at its zenith, but the true tyrant is hunger. The revolutionary government, the Committee of Public Safety, has overseen the collapse of the French agricultural system. The cities are gripped by famine. The countryside is in chaos, and the nation, encircled by the hostile monarchies of Europe, is on the brink of total collapse. The grand experiment of liberty, equality, and fraternity is about to die, not from a foreign bayonet, but from an empty stomach. 1,000 miles away, in the rolling vastness of the mid-Atlantic, floats France's only hope. It is a phantom fleet, 117 merchant vessels, heavy laden with grain and flour from the fields of America. A lifeline purchased with the last of the revolutionary gold, this convoy is more than food. It is survival. It is the fuel for the armies, the bread for the mobs, and the one thin thread holding the radical government in power. Its safe arrival in Brest is not just desirable, it is the single most important strategic objective of the entire year. If it fails, France starves and the revolution dies. But the Atlantic is not empty. It is the hunting ground of the British Royal Navy. In England, the war against revolutionary France is at a low ebb. The government is unpopular. The army has been humiliated on the continent, and the nation is gripped by a weary pessimism. They do not know the full extent of France's desperation, but they know about the convoy. For King George's navy, the mission is simple, brutal, and absolute. Find the grain fleet, intercept it, and destroy it. To do so would deliver a mortal blow to the French Republic, ending the war at a stroke and eliminating the revolutionary contagion that so terrifies the crowned heads of Europe. The fate of two nations now rests on two opposing fleets, and on two men. One is a quiet, grim aristocrat. The other, a nobleman forced to serve a regime that hunts his own kind. This is not a battle for territory. It is a battle for bread, a battle for survival. The stage is a 400-mile patch of open ocean, west of the island of Ushant. The prize is the future of Europe. For Britain, it is a chance to crush its oldest enemy. For France, it is a desperate race against time, a last gamble to feed the revolution. The winds of May are rising, and the two greatest naval forces on earth, 25 ships of the line for Britain and 26 for France, are sailing inexorably toward a confrontation that will be remembered not for the day it was fought, but for the month it began, the glorious 1st of June. On May the 2nd, 1794, the British Channel Fleet, the wall and shield of the Empire, clears Portsmouth Harbour. At its head is a man who seems a relic of a bygone age. Admiral Richard Howe, 1st Earl Howe, is 68 years old, a quiet, sombre figure whose swarthy complexion has earned him the gruffly affectionate nickname Black Dick from the thousands of men who sail under his command. He is a veteran of the last war, the American one, a conflict that had ended in humiliation for Britain. Howe is a brilliant naval mind, a man who has spent his career perfecting the complex language of signal flags, dreaming of new ways to shatter the rigid, indecisive tactics of the past. But he is famously taciturn, a poor communicator who keeps his complex plans locked behind a grim expression, trusting his captains to understand instincts he cannot, or will not, fully explain. His fleet is a floating city of oak and iron, 25 ships of the line, the heaviest concentration of firepower on the planet. Each is a fortress, a wooden wall bristling with cannon. His flagship, the mighty HMS Queen Charlotte, carries 100 guns, a vessel of terrifying power. With her sail other legendary names, the Royal George, the Bellerophon, the Brunswick. In total, nearly 17,000 sailors and Royal Marines man this fleet, a rough, brutal, and lethally professional force, masters of the sea and the chaotic gunnery that decides its battles. Howe's orders are simple. Find the convoy. He is not just a hunter, he is an executioner, sent to sever France's transatlantic lifeline. He is sailing not just against the French fleet, but against the fog, the gales, and the sheer confounding emptiness of the Atlantic Ocean. His opponent is a man fighting for his life. Rear Admiral Louis-Thomas Villeray-Joyeuse is 44, a skilled and courageous officer from the old pre-revolutionary aristocracy. He is a man trapped by history, a nobleman forced to serve a republic that has executed his king and is actively purging his class. He commands a fleet of 26 ships of the line, a force nominally equal or even superior to Howe's. His flagship, the Montagne, is a floating monster, the largest warship in the world at 120 guns, a visible symbol of revolutionary power. But Villeray-Joyeuse's crews are a mix of veteran sailors and untrained revolutionary zealots. His primary mission is not, in fact, to defeat Howe. It is to find the grain convoy first, gather it under his protection, and shepherd it safely to Brest. He is to fight only if he must, and then only to distract the British, to draw them away, to sacrifice his own warships if necessary, so that the merchantmen can slip by. And he is not truly in command. Standing on the quarterdeck of the Montagne, a dark shadow at the Admiral's shoulder, is Jean-Bon Saint-André. He is not a sailor. He is a politician, a member of the Committee of Public Safety, a representative on mission. He is the embodiment of the reign of terror at sea, a political ideologue sent to ensure revolutionary zeal and to watch for any sign of aristocratic failure. His presence is a mortal threat. For Villeray-Joyeuse, a tactical mistake will not mean a court-martial, it will mean the guillotine. He is sailing with a political executioner at his back, forced to balance the complex art of naval warfare with the deadly simplicities of revolutionary paranoia. As May wears on, these two fleets, these two admirals, begin their lethal game of hide-and-seek, maneuvering through the wind and waves, each straining for the first sight of a distant sail. For 3 weeks, the ocean is a cold, empty expanse. Howe's fleet, a pack of hounds cast wide, sweeps the sea lanes, searching for any sign of Villeray-Joyeuse or the convoy he protects. Finally, on May 28th, the hunt is over. Lookouts, perched high on the swaying masts, cry out. Sails. Not the mass of merchantmen, but the hard, familiar silhouettes of warships. The French Atlantic Fleet. The chase is on. Howe, sensing his chance, signals for a general pursuit. The British ships, generally better maintained and handled, begin to overhaul the French rear. The first clash is a brutal, lopsided duel. The French 110-gun ship, the Revolutionnaire, finds itself isolated, swarmed by a squadron of British 74s. For hours, she endures a terrific pounding, her masts crashing down, her hull shattered, but her crew refuses to strike their colours. As darkness falls, she is a dismasted wreck, but her sacrifice is not in vain. Under cover of night, she is towed back to the safety of a French port, a propaganda victory plucked from a tactical disaster. But Howe has tasted blood. He will not be denied. The next day, May 29th, dawns grey and windy. Howe has the weather gauge, the crucial upwind position, allowing him to dictate the terms of the engagement. He decides to force the action. This will not be a polite, parallel exchange of broadsides. He signals for his fleet to attack the French rear, to concentrate his power and destroy them piecemeal. It is a good plan, but the execution is confused. His complex signals are, as ever, poorly understood by his captains. The attack is disjointed, but it is still overwhelming. British ships, including the Bellerophon, plunge into the French line. The sound of the first broadsides is a physical shock, a rolling thunder that echoes for miles. The air fills with the acrid, sulphurous stink of black powder. The British ships are close enough to use their secret weapon, the carronade. These short, heavy smashers fire massive 68-pound balls at close range, and the effect is horrific. They do not just punch holes, they obliterate entire sections of the French ships' wooden hulls. The air is filled with a deadly storm of splinters, thousands of jagged shards of oak, large and small, that fly across the gun decks with the force of shrapnel. eviscerating the French crews. The screams of the wounded are lost in the continuous, deafening roar of the guns. Villeret-Joyeuse, seeing his rear guard being annihilated, reacts with cool professionalism. He maneuvers his fleet skillfully, turning back to rescue his crippled ships, placing his own massive flagship, the Montagne, in the thick of the fighting. Jean-Bon Saint-André, the political watchdog, sees the carnage firsthand. The reality of naval combat, far from the orchestrated rallies of Paris. As the sun sets, the battle ends indecisively. The French have been badly mauled, several ships disabled, but their line is unbroken. Villeret-Joyeuse has saved his fleet. Howe is frustrated, his plan for a decisive blow thwarted. Both fleets, battered and bloodied, drift apart to repair their rigging and tend to their wounded, floating in the long Atlantic swell, knowing the final decisive act is yet to come. The Battle of the 29th ends not with a victor, but with an impasse. As darkness falls, the two fleets are a collection of floating hospitals, their decks slick with blood and littered with the debris of shattered rigging and splintered wood. Throughout the night, the hammering of carpenters' mallets echoes across the water, a frantic, percussive race to patch holes, fish broken masts, and re-string the miles of rope that serve as the ship's engines and nervous systems. The human cost is counted in the dark, as surgeons work in the dim, swaying lantern light of the orlop decks, their aprons soaked, their saws grimly at work. The dead, sewn into their own hammocks with a final cannonball at their feet, are given their last rites and slipped quietly over the side, a sombre, unseen punctuation to the day's fury. Then, on the morning of May 30th, the battlefield changes. A new, silent force enters the engagement, one that favours neither Britain nor France. Fog. It rolls in from the vast emptiness of the Atlantic, a thick, wet, and impenetrable blanket of white. The world shrinks from a horizon of miles to a mere 50 yards. The two fleets, the most powerful concentrations of force on Earth, are rendered blind. They are just a few miles apart, so close that the lookouts can sometimes hear the bells of the enemy ships striking the hour, a ghostly, disembodied sound drifting through the damp air. But they are completely, utterly invisible to one in another. They are two blind giants, wounded and wary, listening in the dark. This fog is a shroud of terrifying tension. For the crews, it is a nerve-shredding ordeal. Every sound is magnified. The creak of a timber, the groan of a bulkhead, the sudden snap of a topsail in a phantom breeze. They wait, guns loaded, matches lit, staring into a blank wall of white, convinced the enemy must be just beyond their sight, manoeuvring for a killing blow. An entire broadside could erupt from the mist at any moment, a devastating, unseen attack. The damp cold seeps into their bones. The decks are slick with moisture, the sails heavy and dripping. The ships drift on the long, heaving swell of the open ocean, silent, but for the drip of water and the anxious murmurs of men. But this fog, a torment for the gun crews, is a godsend for France. While Howe and Villeret-Joyeuse are frozen in this blind duel, listening for each other's foghorns and signal guns, the true prize is making its escape. Far to the south, protected by this same vast weather system, the 117 merchant ships of the grain convoy, the lifeline of the revolution, are sailing steadily, undetected, toward Brest. The fog that has locked the two war fleets in a tense stalemate is the very same fog that is providing a perfect, impenetrable screen for the ships that truly matter. Villeret-Joyeuse's primary mission is being accomplished, not by the thunder of his guns, but by the silence of the weather. He has drawn Howe into a fight, fixed him in place, and now the elements are doing the rest. The grain is slipping past. For 2 full days, May 30th and May 31st, the impasse holds. The fleets grope for each other, firing occasional cannons into the mist, hoping for a random hit or an answering shot that will betray a position. But there is nothing. It is a war of nerves, a strategic pause dictated by the sea itself. Admiral Howe, grim and impatient, knows his prey is near, but he is powerless. He has fixed the escort, but he cannot destroy it, and he has no idea that the convoy he was sent to destroy is, at this very moment, passing him. The fate of France is sailing by, unseen. All that is left is the final, bloody, and now strategically pointless reckoning. As the last day of May comes to an end, the air begins to change. The wind quickens, the white wall begins to shred, and the men on both sides feel the promise of a clear dawn. The fog is lifting. The final act is about to begin. June 1st, 1794. The dawn breaks clear and cold, 400 nautical miles from land. At 08:15, the sun, a pale disk, burns away the last tendrils of mist, and the sea is revealed. It is a moment of stark, breathtaking clarity. There, etched against the morning light, is the entire French fleet. The fog has not scattered them. They are in perfect line of battle, 26 ships strong, sailing parallel to the British, just a few miles distant. For the 17,000 men in the British Channel Fleet, this is the moment. The chase is over. The enemy is in sight, cleared for action. On every deck, the drums beat to quarters, a frantic, rolling thunder that calls every man to his battle station. The Marines assemble on the upper decks, their red coats a stark splash of colour against the holystoned wood, their muskets ready. Below, on the gun decks, the crews, stripped to the waist, run out their massive 32-pounder cannons. Tubs of water and sand are positioned to fight the inevitable fires. The powder boys, some as young as 10, stand ready to make the dangerous run from the magazine, their canvas bags soon to be filled with cartridges of black powder. On the quarterdeck of the HMS Queen Charlotte, Admiral Lord Howe stares at the enemy line. He knows the old way. The traditional tactic would be to sail alongside the French, a line of battle, where two fleets pound each other in a stately, formalized, and often inconclusive duel until one side gives way. It is a tactic of attrition, not annihilation. Howe, the grim innovator, has spent a career planning for this very moment. He wants not just to defeat the French, but to destroy them. He intends to unleash a tactic so audacious, so violent, that it will shatter the enemy's cohesion in a single brutal stroke. He turns to his signal officer. A string of brightly coloured flags is hoisted to the masthead. At 09:30, the signal ripples down the British line. It is a general order, and it is revolutionary. Howe is not ordering his fleet to sail alongside the French. He is ordering every one of his 25 ships to turn independently, at the same time, and steer directly at the French line. Each British ship is to find a gap and punch through it, to break the enemy's line. The goal is to smash into the French formation from the leeward side, the downwind side. This will achieve two things. First, it will prevent the French from escaping, as they would have to turn back into the wind and into the victorious British fleet. Second, and more terrifyingly, as each British ship cuts through, it will be able to fire its broadsides down the length of the French ships, a devastating tactic known as raking. A single raking shot can travel the entire length of a ship from stern to bow, transforming the packed gun decks into a killing alley, a hurricane of iron and splinters. It is a plan of genius, demanding perfect timing, iron discipline, and unwavering courage from every captain. And it is a plan that Black Dick Howe, the brilliant but taciturn admiral, has failed to adequately explain. The signal is complex. It is confusing. On the quarterdecks of the British ships, captains stare at the flags, then at the enemy, then back at their admiral's flagship. What does it mean? Turn now, all at once, or in succession. The result is not the elegant, synchronized maneuver Howe envisioned. The result is chaos. A few captains, bold and aggressive, understand the intent and turn their wheels immediately, their bows plunging toward the enemy. Others, more cautious or simply confused, hesitate. They revert to the old, comfortable tactic, turning to engage the nearest enemy ship. Instead of a single clean rupture, the British attack becomes a ragged, uncoordinated, and utterly ferocious charge. The 25 ships of the line, a wall of oak and canvas, are no longer a perfect line. They are a pack of hounds, unleashed, hurtling toward the French at the agonizingly slow speed of 5 knots. The French, seeing this uncoordinated but terrifying wave of ships bearing down on them, hold their fire, waiting, their guns double-shotted, their crews braced for an impact that will be unlike anything they have ever known. At 10 hours a.m., the British fleet crashes into the French line. The French, demonstrating iron discipline, hold their fire until the British bows are just yards away. Then, the entire line explodes. 26 ships of the line, bearing over 2,000 cannons, fire a single coordinated broadside. The ocean itself seems to erupt. The sound is not a series of bangs, but one continuous deafening roar, a perpetual thunder that is felt as a physical concussion miles away. The first volley smashes into the charging British ships, sending clouds of splinters and torn rigging into the air. But the charge is irreversible. Through the wall of smoke and iron, the British ships come on. Admiral Howe, on the Queen Charlotte, leads the attack himself. He steers his 100-gun flagship not for a gap, but for the hull of the French flagship, the massive Montagne. His sailing master, seeing the inevitable collision, pleads with him to turn. Howe's response is ice cold. "What has that to do with you, sir?" "Starboard." The Queen Charlotte lurches, its bow just scraping the Montagne's stern. They are so close that the Montagne's tricolour flag, flying from its stern, brushes the Queen Charlotte's rigging. For this one perfect moment, Howe has his prey exactly where he wants her. He gives the order. The Queen Charlotte's entire port broadside, 50 cannons, double-shotted, fires as one. The guns are not aimed at the Montagne. They are aimed down its length. This is the raking fire, the most horrific attack in naval warfare. 50 cannonballs, a ton of iron, tear through the Montagne's unprotected stern. They rip down the entire length of the ship, deck by deck, transforming the crowded, chaotic gun decks into a charnel house. The Montagne's guns are pointing uselessly out the side, while the British volley scythes through the men who serve them. Hundreds of men are killed or wounded in an instant. The Queen Charlotte then glides past, firing its starboard broadside into the next ship in line, the Jacobin, with equally devastating effect. But this moment of tactical perfection is lost in the larger chaos. Because Howe's signal was misunderstood, the battle does not become a neat crossing of the T. It dissolves instantly into a melee. This is not a formal line of battle. It is a brutal, chaotic brawl. The two fleets, numbering over 50 ships of the line, are now hopelessly entangled, a confused mass of vessels drifting in a thick, choking cloud of their own gun smoke. All order is gone. The sky is black with powder smoke. Visibility is reduced to 0. Ships are completely blind, firing only at the orange flashes of enemy cannons that appear, like ghosts, in the acrid fog of war. The sound is overwhelming, the unending roar of the 32-pounders, the high-pitched crack and groan of splintering oak hulls, the terrifying crash of 100-foot masts, weighing tons as they are shot through and fall, bringing a spider's web of rigging and screaming men down with them. The battle has become a series of individual ship-to-ship duels, exactly the kind of fight that favours the superior seamanship and, crucially, the faster, more professional gunnery of the Royal Navy. The British crews, drilled relentlessly, can fire 3 broadsides to the French 2. In this close quarters, point-blank fight, that speed is decisive. The fight is no longer about admirals and grand tactics. It is about blood, sweat, and iron, as locked ships pound each other to pieces, their cannons firing directly into each other's hulls, the heat of the muzzle blast scorching the enemy's paint. This is the hell that Howe, in his quest for a perfect, elegant victory, has accidentally unleashed. In the heart of the smoke-filled chaos, the battle ceases to be a contest of fleets and becomes a score of private, desperate wars. No duel is more savage, no fight more emblematic of the day's brutal character than the death struggle between His Majesty's ship, Brunswick, and the French 74-gun Vengeur du Peuple. The Brunswick's captain, John Harvey, had been one of those who struggled to interpret Howe's signal. In the confusion of the charge, he found himself bearing down not through a gap, but directly onto the Vengeur. As the two ships, both behemoths of 74 guns, approached, they became hopelessly entangled. The Brunswick's anchors hooked into the Vengeur's fore-rigging, and with a terrible splintering groan, the two ships slammed into each other, side to side, and locked fast. They were now, literally, one single, floating battlefield. What followed was not naval gunnery, it was mutual, point-blank execution. The ships were locked so tightly that the crews of both vessels could not open their lower deck gun ports, which were jammed against the enemy's hull. With grim ferocity, the British gunners, screaming over the din, used cannonballs and crowbars to smash their own gun ports open. Then they fired. The muzzles of the 32-pounders were not aimed at the Vengeur. They were pressed against it. When they discharged, the explosion was a localized earthquake, the cannonballs smashing instantly through the French hull, followed by a torrent of flame that set the Vengeur ablaze. The French, with equal desperation, fired back. Their shot pulverized the Brunswick's hull, the iron balls passing completely through the ship and out the other side. On the upper decks, the fight was a medieval slaughter. Royal Marines on the Brunswick's poop deck fired volleys of musket fire down onto the packed, exposed decks of the French. The Vengeur's own troops fired back. Both ships loaded their cannons not with round shot, but with grape shot. Giant canvas bags filled with iron balls that turned the cannons into shotguns, sweeping the enemy's decks clear of life. Men were scythed down in heaps. The sound was a physical weight, an unending, deafening roar of cannons firing not in broadsides, but in a frantic, rolling rhythm, as fast as the gun crews could sponge, load, and fire. The air was so thick with black, choking smoke that the sun was completely obliterated. Men worked blind, coughing and suffocating, their bare feet slipping in the blood and gore that washed across the decks. For hours, this nightmare continued. The Brunswick itself was dismasted, its rigging shredded, its hull a sieve, but its crew fought with a cold, terrifying rage. Captain Harvey, his hand shattered, continued to direct the battle, refusing to leave the deck until a French round shot nearly tore him in two. The Vengeur du Peuple was, incredibly, absorbing even more punishment. It was not just fighting the Brunswick. Another French ship, the Aquila, had drifted into the fight and, in the confusion, was firing into both ships. The Vengeur was being systematically annihilated. Its masts were gone, its hull was a lattice of splintered holes, and its gun decks were a scene of unimaginable horror. Yet, inspired by revolutionary zeal, or perhaps just the terror of Jean-Bon Saint-André, its crew refused to surrender. They fought on, their diminishing fire a testament to a courage born of desperation. This was the true face of the mêlée, not a battle of tactics, but a slugging match of attrition, a question of which wooden wall would crumble first, which crew would be the last one standing. By 1 p.m, the battle is no longer a coherent engagement. It is a sprawling, smoking wreck field. The continuous deafening thunder of the broadsides begins to slacken, replaced by the sporadic, ragged firing of individual guns and the terrible human sounds that had been drowned out by the din. The high-pitched screams of the wounded, the crashing of falling spars, and the roar of fires. The Vengeur du Peuple, locked in its death grip with the Brunswick, is a floating coffin. It has absorbed a horrific, concentrated punishment for hours, not just from its primary opponent, but from other ships that have drifted through the fight. The French 74 gunship is now completely dismasted. Its hull is so shattered that the sea is pouring in through 100 holes. On its gun decks, the The scene is apocalyptic. The guns are silent, most dismounted by enemy shot or their crews annihilated. The decks are awash with a crimson tide, a ghastly mixture of seawater, blood, and gunpowder. The Vengeur is sinking. Its tricolour flag, however, remains nailed to the stump of its mast. Its surviving crew, stunned and bleeding, are now faced with a choice: surrender or drown. As the Brunswick, itself a crippled, dismasted hulk, finally drifts free, British ships, including the Royal George, close in on the dying French vessel. They cease firing, their own gun crews exhausted, their faces blackened with powder, staring in grim silence at the state of their enemy. This is the moment that will be twisted by revolutionary propaganda in Paris. The French government will later claim the crew of the Vengeur went down as one, heroically singing La Marseillaise and shouting, "Long live the Republic," as the waves closed over their heads, a myth of revolutionary martyrdom. The reality, recorded by the British sailors who were there, is more human and more harrowing. The Vengeur is foundering, and its surviving crew, those not trapped below on the sinking gun decks, are in a panic, scrambling up the shattered rigging, waving their hats and crying for rescue. They do not want to die. The British, victors in this brutal duel, immediately begin the work of mercy. Boats are lowered from the Brunswick and other ships, pulling nearly 400 desperate, half-drowned French sailors from the sea as the Vengeur du Peuple shudders, lurches, and then, with a terrible sucking sound, slides beneath the waves, its colours still flying. It is a moment of profound, terrible victory. And what of the flagships? While the Vengeur was dying, the Montagne, the largest ship in the world, was in a fight for its life. After being raked by Howe's Queen Charlotte, Villaret-Joyeuse found his colossal vessel set upon by other British ships. The Montagne was a monster, but it was not invincible. It was heavily damaged, its rigging cut to pieces, its hull breached, its decks a scene of carnage that had horrified the political observer, Jean-Bon Saint-André. The revolutionary zealot, who had been there to ensure the Admiral's aggression, now saw the price of that aggression. Faced with the destruction of his flagship and the collapse of his line, Villaret-Joyeuse had a choice: become a martyr like the captain of the Vengeur, or save his fleet. He chose the latter. With his ship crippled, he signalled a retreat, turning the Montagne downwind and limping away from the epicenter of the fight. It was a tactical necessity, but it was the death knell for the French fleet. The centre had broken. By 5 p.m, the guns have fallen silent. The perpetual thunder has ceased, and the vast cloud of black powder smoke, which for hours had choked the battlefield and blotted out the sun, begins to drift away, thinned by the Atlantic breeze. The scene it reveals is one of utter desolation. The ocean is a floating graveyard, a 400-mile expanse of sea littered with the wreckage of the two most powerful fleets on Earth. Smashed yards, shattered masts, and tangled webs of rigging rise and fall on the long, bloody swell. The water is thick with debris, splintered planks, broken sea chests, and the pale, bobbing bodies of the dead. For the British, the sight is one of savage, exhausted triumph. The French fleet is broken. Villaret-Joyeuse, his flagship, Montagne, barely seaworthy, is in full retreat, gathering what scattered, crippled ships he can and limping for the horizon. Left behind, in the possession of the victorious British, are 6 shattered prizes, 6 French ships of the line, their colours struck, their masts gone, their decks a silent testament to the fury of the battle. A 7th, the Vengeur du Peuple, has vanished beneath the waves, a permanent watery grave for hundreds of its crew. Lord Howe's victory is total and undeniable. He has met the enemy, and he has crushed them, but it is a victory bought at a terrible price. The British Channel Fleet, though victorious, is a fleet of cripples. Howe's own flagship, the Queen Charlotte, is a wreck. The Brunswick is a dismasted, floating hulk, its captain, John Harvey, mortally wounded. The Bellerophon is savaged. Nearly every ship in the British line has suffered. Masts are shattered, hulls are pierced, and rigging is shredded. The fleet is in no condition to pursue its broken enemy. Howe, exhausted and grim, looks at the state of his ships, at the hundreds of wounded men who need immediate care, and at the 6 priceless prizes he must now secure. He makes the controversial but necessary decision. The battle is over. He will not risk his battered fleet or his prizes in a stern chase. He will consolidate his victory and turn for home. The human cost is staggering. On the British decks, approximately 200 men are dead or wounded. An entire generation of sailors has been scarred by the carnage they witnessed and inflicted. But for the French, the day is a catastrophe. Their losses are appalling. An estimated 4,000 men are killed or wounded, a horrific toll. In addition, another 3,000 French sailors are now prisoners, pulled from their sinking ships or captured on the decks of the prizes. The French Atlantic Fleet, as a coherent fighting force, has been shattered. Its ships are broken, its veteran crews decimated, its morale destroyed. Howe has, by any tactical measure, achieved one of the most decisive naval victories of the age. He has reasserted the dominance of the Royal Navy and given Britain a desperately needed hero. But as his fleet, wounded and triumphant, slowly turns its bow toward Portsmouth, towing its captured trophies, a crucial question remains unanswered. In the chaos of the fog, in the fury of the melee, what happened to the convoy? As Admiral Howe's battered fleet makes its slow, triumphant passage back to Portsmouth, they are the conquering heroes. The 6 captured French ships of the line, dismasted and flying the British ensign above the French tricolour, are the undeniable proof of a victory on a scale not seen in decades. The British public, starved for good news from the war, is about to erupt in a wave of ecstatic celebration. Lord Howe will be lauded as the saviour of the nation, the man who met the revolutionary Hydra at sea and decapitated it. But on the long, rolling swells of the Atlantic, a second, invisible battle has been fought and won by the French. The entire May campaign had been a grand, lethal deception. The real prize was never the Montagne or the Vengeur du Peuple. The real prize was the Ghost Fleet, the 117 merchant vessels laden with American grain, the lifeblood of a starving France. While Howe was hunting Villeret-Joyeuse, the French admiral was, in turn, executing his own desperate, sacrificial mission. His orders from the Committee of Public Safety, delivered under the watchful, unforgiving eye of Jean-Bon Saint-André, were simple. Find the convoy, meet it, and ensure its safety at all costs. He was not to win a battle, he was to prevent an interception. If that meant sacrificing his entire fleet to distract the British, so be it. The fog on May 30th and 31st had not just been a nuisance, it had been the decisive strategic event of the campaign. While the 2 blind giants, the British and French battle fleets, stalked each other in the mist, the convoy, protected by its own small separate escort squadron, was sailing on a different course. It had slipped past them all. Villeret-Joyeuse had performed his role perfectly. He had been the Matador's cape, a massive, threatening, and irresistible target, drawing the British bull. He had presented his fleet for battle, absorbing the full, focused, annihilating fury of the Royal Navy. He had sacrificed his ships and thousands of his men to hold Lord Howe's attention for 3 crucial days. The glorious 1st of June was the sound of this magnificent bloody distraction reaching its climax. Every 32-pounder that roared, every mast that crashed, every cheer from a British gun crew was a sound that marked the convoy's safe passage. While the Brunswick and the Vengeur were locked in their mutual destruction, the merchantmen, heavy with the grain that would save the revolution, were catching the wind, unmolested, on their final run to Brest. On June 12th, even as Lord Howe and his victorious fleet were being paraded through the streets of London, the 117 ships of the grain convoy sailed quietly into Brest harbour. The arrival was not met with cheers, but with a desperate, frantic relief. The grain was immediately unloaded and rushed to Paris. The famine was broken. The bread riots would cease. The Committee of Public Safety, its power secured by this vital lifeline, could now continue the reign of terror and reorganize its armies for the next phase of the war. The irony was absolute and terrible. Howe had won a smashing, tactically brilliant victory. He had captured or sunk 7 enemy ships of the line and shattered the French Atlantic fleet. But in doing so, he had been completely outmaneuvered. He had failed in his primary mission. The grain got through. France would not starve. The revolution would survive. The war would not end. It would in fact continue for another 21 brutal years. The news of the battle reached Britain first. It arrived not as a complex strategic analysis, but as a simple, visceral fact. Howe had met the French, and he had won. When his fleet, battered but proud, was sighted off the coast, the nation erupted. The 6 captured French warships, limping into Portsmouth harbour under the guns of the British forts, were the largest haul of prizes taken in a single fleet action in living memory. They were tangible, wooden proof of the Royal Navy's enduring supremacy. After a series of humiliating setbacks on land and a growing sense of weariness with the war, Britain was desperate for a hero. In the 68-year-old Black Dick Howe, they found one. The celebrations were ecstatic, a national outpouring of relief and patriotic fervour. The crews, as they disembarked, were hailed as saviours. The wounded, including the dying Captain Harvey of the Brunswick, were mourned as martyrs. Lord Howe himself was paraded through the streets of London. King George III, a monarch in dire need of a victory to shore up his government's flagging support, travelled to Portsmouth to personally honour the Admiral. He boarded the flagship Queen Charlotte, its deck still bearing the scars of the Montagne's fire, and presented Howe with a diamond-encrusted sword and a golden chain. The victory was a political godsend. It galvanised public support for the war, silenced parliamentary critics, and provided a massive, vital boost to national morale. The battle was christened the Glorious 1st of June, a name that cemented its place in public consciousness as an uncomplicated, complete, and resounding triumph. In this wave of celebration, the strategic details were lost. No one knew, or perhaps no one wanted to know, about the 117 merchant ships. The primary objective, the interception of the grain convoy, was quietly forgotten, overshadowed by the immediate, spectacular, and bloody results of the battle itself. The victory was defined not by the convoy that got away, but by the 7 enemy battleships that did not. The Royal Navy had proven once again that in a straight, stand-up fight, ship to ship and crew to crew, they were the undisputed masters of the sea. The destruction of the French Atlantic fleet, the capture of thousands of veteran sailors, and the sheer audacity of Howe's charge were in themselves a significant strategic blow. It would take the French years to recover the ships, and even longer to replace the trained, experienced crews sent to British prison hulks or to the bottom of the Atlantic. This tactical victory had profound long-term consequences. It reasserted British naval dominance, securing the Channel and ensuring that Britain itself would remain safe from the threat of invasion. It crippled the main French fleet, forcing them to adopt a different, more cautious strategy of commerce, raiding and avoiding direct fleet confrontations. It was, in many ways, the first great victory in a naval war that would come to define the entire 20-year struggle, setting the stage for future, even more decisive, clashes at the Nile and Trafalgar. The men who fought and died in the chaotic melee, the gun crews of the Brunswick, the Marines on the Queen Charlotte, the sailors who pulled their French enemies from the sinking Vengeur, had not failed. They had done exactly what was asked of them. They had found the enemy, engaged him, and destroyed him. Their victory was real, it was bloody, and it was, in its own right, truly glorious. The fact that it was also a strategic failure was a bitter, complex truth that would only be fully understood by historians long after the victory parades had ended and the last celebratory bonfire had burned to embers. The glorious 1st of June remains one of the strangest and most misunderstood battles in naval history. It is a story of 2 victories and 2 defeats. In Britain, Lord Howe was cemented as a legend, the forgotten admiral who, at a moment of deep national pessimism, delivered a stunning and desperately needed triumph. He had saved the nation's morale. His tactical innovation, the breaking of the line, though poorly executed and chaotic, had shattered the old formal rules of engagement. It had ushered in a new doctrine for the Royal Navy, one of total annihilating aggression, a philosophy that would be perfected a decade later by another, more famous admiral, Horatio Nelson. The battle set the tone for the rest of the war at sea, a war Britain would ultimately win. In France, the story was inverted. Rear Admiral Villeray-Joyeuse, the man who had been defeated, returned to a hero's welcome. The Committee of Public Safety, overjoyed at the arrival of the grain, had no intention of letting a mere tactical defeat spoil the news of their strategic salvation. They declared the campaign a stunning success. Villeray-Joyeuse, despite losing 7 ships of the line, was promoted. The politician, Jean Bon Saint-André, spun a masterful tale of revolutionary courage, with the sinking of the Vengeurs du Peuple as its centerpiece. The myth of the crew singing La Marseillaise as they drowned, a fabrication of pure propaganda, became a rallying cry for the Republic, a symbol of their ideological refusal to surrender. In the end, Villeray-Joyeuse, the nobleman admiral, had achieved the impossible. He had fulfilled his mission, saved the revolution from starvation, and, by surviving, had even saved his own neck from the guillotine. In the final, cold calculus of war, who truly won? Howe won the battle. He crippled the French fleet, captured its ships, and killed or captured thousands of its sailors. He proved the Royal Navy's tactical supremacy, a supremacy that would ultimately strangle Napoleon's ambitions. But Villeray-Joyeuse won the campaign. He did what he was sent to do. He sacrificed his fleet to save his nation. The 117 ships of the grain convoy, the true prize, reached Brest. France ate. The revolution did not collapse. The war did not end. It would instead escalate, consuming Europe for another 21 years. The glorious 1st of June was not the decisive blow Britain had hoped for. It was merely the first bloody chapter in a long and brutal epic, a chaotic, savage, and perfectly contradictory encounter in the vast, unforgiving Atlantic, where a battle was won, but a strategic victory was, for a fleeting, crucial moment, lost. Thanks for watching. If you found this story fascinating, please hit the like button, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'll see you in the next video.